It's just been over a year since Phillip Eng took over at the MBTA, stepping into the role amid widespread slowdowns, staff and equipment shortages, and federal scrutiny after a long string of accidents, including multiple deaths. Eng promised to usher in a new way of doing business and quickly launched major repair projects and temporary shutdowns. A year in, has he managed to get the T back on track? I'm joined now by GBH News transportation reporter Bob Seay, who led a forum with Eng earlier this week, along with a few other transportation officials and advocates, including TransitMatters Executive Director Jarred Johnson. Bob, Jarred, thanks for being here with me today.
Thanks for having me.
Good to be here.
So, Bob, you had the opportunity to sit down with the people in charge of the T, including the new GM, Phil Eng. What were your big takeaways from that discussion?
Well, I think it's important for people to realize that Mr. Eng is probably the first experienced professional transit administrator we've had in probably 10 years to run the MBTA. And he's also a very focused person who really understands what the job entails. And if you heard what he had to say on our forum Tuesday night, you'd see that. Plus, there's an openness. He talked a lot about communication. It was really important for the T to be communicating with people. And for many years, they were not doing that as openly as they should have been doing. Certainly, there are still lots of problems, which he will acknowledge have to be fixed. But a lot of people feel he's the right guy at the right time to try to fix the T.
Yeah, and Jarred, I know there's been kind of a lot of enthusiasm from people in the transit space about having Phil Eng in this role. People seem to be very optimistic. Have you seen a difference, things he's doing differently than past leadership?
Absolutely. I think we noticed that, I think, really acutely last October whenever the T had one of their first major shutdowns on the red line, and it was a stark contrast from how things went whenever the orange line shut down. And so we saw the track work actually bear fruit in terms of shorter travel times, and we saw that they were asking some of the right questions, like, well, wait a minute, why are we saying that the track needs a week to tamper down? We could just bring in equipment to do that, and then bring the speeds up, the first day when the first day that service returns. And so we've absolutely seen a market change, and I think whether it's the transparency or whether the communication, there's definitely a clear difference between Eng and some of his predecessors.
And so in that forum, we have a little bit I want to play of, Bob, you asked Phillip Eng why he wants to be on this job. We can play a piece of that.
I've always wanted to ask you whether some mornings you woke up and wondered how you got yourself into this situation.
I wanted to come. When you see the needs, and one of the reasons that so many folks are here tonight, and when we don't do what we say we're going to do, that's why people get frustrated. We make an impact on people's lives, and what we're trying to do is make a positive impact on people's lives, and I know we can.
So, Bob, what kind of impact has there been since he's been on the job?
Well, I think it's refreshing to have somebody like Phil Eng on the job, and he speaks openly about the challenges. He speaks openly about what has to be done. But he has a systematic way of addressing these problems. For instance, the track improvement, which was in chaos, and he was mostly reacting to emergencies that were taking place. He actually came up with a plan, we're kind of 1/3 of the way through it this year. It almost is rebuilding the entire system. I mean, that's how big the problem is. But at least he has a plan now. And he's been able to tell people months in advance what they can expect. And that certainly is different from what used to be.
So this is a big job. It's certainly a daunting task to be head of the MBTA at a time of all these challenges. I want to look back about a year to when Phil Eng first took on this role. We had Doug Most on Greater Boston. Doug Most, former editor of Boston Globe magazine, an author of The Race Underground, looking at America's first subway system here in Boston. Here's what he had to say when Phillip Eng first took this job.
I think Boston over the years has probably gone through several boxes of Band-Aids trying to fix its system. He'll be able to find ways to improve, some alerts and maybe make some cars better, maybe make a few tracks better here and there. That will happen. But Bostonians, I think, are hungry for bigger changes than just that. And that's going to require real investment.
So, Jarred, I'll ask you here, where are we in terms of that investment? Is the state putting in the resources the T needs?
They are starting to. I think that whether it's the governor's budget, which added a lot more into the T's operating budget, and the House budget, which even increased that further, I think we're starting to see that. But the T talked about their upcoming capital budget and noted that in order to do the track improvement program, that they did have to take money from other projects, including a bus facility that served 50% of the city of Boston. So there are still real needs there, and the work that the general manager is doing is incredibly important. But it means that if we want to continue on with some of the modernization projects that the T needs, or some of the expansion projects that the T needs to do, and that there's broad support for, there's going to need to be a lot more investment, a lot more money.
So, and that House budget is up for debate next week. House leaders have said they're putting or proposing to put a record amount of investment into the MBTA. But, Bob, as I look at your reporting, that's fiscal year 2025. The T is still looking ahead to the following fiscal year, fiscal 2026, a possible deficit. At the same time, we've still got all these safety and reliability improvements. We've got plans to roll out a low-income fare program. How do they do all this with the fiscal constraints that are true in all of state government right now?
Well, as you know, the governor appointed a special task force headed by Transportation Secretary Monica Tibbetts not to look in to long-term sustainable funding for the T. It's something that we've heard a lot about over the years, the need for some kind of sustainable, dependable funding source. So it will be very interesting to see what they come up with at the end of this year. There's a lot of options. Politically, what's possible is another situation. And I noticed the governor talked about border tolls, putting tolls at the borders of Massachusetts and other states. I'm not sure that would really work that well, because we'd find ourselves having to pay to go to Rhode Island, for instance. So, but they're at least examining everything they possibly can, because they're going to need everything in order to fund this project.
And Jarred, this transportation financing is really something that's been vexing to Beacon Hill for years. I remember before COVID first took hold in 2020, the House was looking at doing something to give more funding to transportation in Massachusetts. How optimistic are you that this task force and other efforts will actually yield results?
I'm cautiously optimistic. I think the real answer is we don't have a choice. The economic engine that drives the entire Commonwealth, is the great. It's the Greater Boston economy, and we can't. And that relies really heavily on the MBTA. And we've seen how we went from, I think, being the third highest, in terms of traffic, to now I think #1 in some rankings. And so it really is critical. You add on whether it's the traffic angle, the economic angle, and then now we have the housing angle with the MBTA Communities Act. We just have so much riding on the T that we don't have a choice. And I think one of the other positive sides is that, you really have, you have municipalities, you have business leaders, you have advocates, not just transportation advocates, but advocates across a whole, wide swath of different focus areas, really calling for investment in the T and calling for the T to be better. And so that gives me hope, because there is a really broad swath of folks saying that we need to do better, and hopefully that will give the legislature and the governor, that will give them the support they need to embrace some of those bold but sometimes politically tricky options that we need to have on the table.
And I want to key off of something you just said about the interrelation between housing and transit and all these other issues. I'm going to play another little clip from the forum. We have MassDOT Secretary Monica Tibbetts-Nutt talking about what's needed to fix congestion.
Transportation has a housing problem, and it really is. We bring down the cost of housing. I can get people closer in and get them off the road for these entire journeys. If I can get enough funding for the T and I can bring down the cost of the commuter rail, you will see thousands and thousands of people getting out of their cars. If you cannot address those two things, it's going to be very difficult for me to ease the congestion unless everyone is going to stay home. And the people who need to drive in these hours, they have to go to work in person. This is a massive equity issue.
So, Bob, tied up here, we have housing, we have transportation, we have climate change, we have equity. How does the state get a handle on all of this?
When I first started covering transportation, people would ask me why, and that's exactly why, because it affects everyone in so many ways that you don't even realize it. Whether you take the T or not, it affects you. And I think it's very important that Phil Eng demonstrate that the money that's being invested in the T is being spent wisely and effectively. Because if he can do that and convince legislators, he'll make it much easier to get the money he needs to address the problem. In the past, that hasn't been that way. There's been a lot of skepticism about whether spending money on the T was worth it. And I think that we'll see over the next year, if he can demonstrate that he can accomplish what he says he intends to do, that will really help politically in the future to get the money. But there's no question, there's a big bill coming due for a lot of things, but especially transportation.
All right, so a lot to watch moving forward in the budget debate and beyond. Bob Seay from GBH News, Jarred Johnson from TransitMatters, thank you so much for joining us. Bob's full conversation with Jarred, MBTA GM Phillip Eng, and MassDOT Secretary Monica Tibbetts-Nutt will be soon available on the GBH Forum Network YouTube page, along with thousands of other lectures, talks, and interviews with some of the world's foremost scholars, authors, policymakers, and community leaders.